Once upon a time in rural Argentina, a 28-year-old police corporal named Sergio Pucheta was patrolling on his motorcycle down a secluded dirt road. It was the night of March 2, 2006, and darkness enveloped the landscape. The area, known as La Pampa, was famed for its stunning vistas and cowboy heritage. Open fields stretched out on either side of the road, dotted with clusters of trees and backed by looming mountains. Sergio was miles away from any sign of civilization. His mission that night was to watch for poachers who hunted wild cats, monkeys, and exotic birds to sell on the black market. The night had been uneventful so far, but Sergio knew that illegal activities often peaked in the late hours. Around 10 p.m., as he approached a crossroads locally referred to as El Cruz de las Canas, he noticed the red taillights of a car ahead. The vehicle seemed to slow down before veering off the road into a dense patch of vegetation roughly the size of a football field. The taillights vanished among the trees. Sensing that something was amiss, Sergio's pulse quickened. He suspected that the occupants might be poachers trying to evade him. Accelerating his motorcycle to the spot where the car had left the road, he parked and radioed his headquarters to report his location and request backup. Drawing his fire weapon, he knew support would take time to arrive in such a remote area, and he was determined not to let the suspects escape. Without using his flashlight to avoid revealing his position, Sergio began searching for any signs of the car entering the vegetation. Surprisingly, there were no broken branches or disturbed bushes, no evidence that a vehicle had passed through. Confused but undeterred, he scanned the ground for tire tracks but found none. The area appeared untouched. Standing at the edge of the road, Sergio strained his ears for any sounds that might indicate human presence. The night was alive with natural noises. The rustling of leaves in the wind, the chirping of crickets and cicadas, the hooting of owls, and the eerie calls of nightjars. Determined to investigate further, he took a deep breath and ventured into the thicket. Moving carefully, he pushed aside branches with one hand while keeping his fire weapon ready in the other. After advancing about 100 feet into the woods, something caught his eye. A glint in the darkness, like moonlight reflecting off metal. His first thought was that he had found the car. However, when he turned to face it, he was met with a sight so startling that he froze in place. As he stood there, the nocturnal sounds around him seemed to grow louder, amplifying his sense of dread. Panic welled up inside him, and though he tried to scream, no sound escaped his lips. A few minutes later, an off-duty police officer who was a friend of Sergio's was preparing for bed when his phone rang. Seeing Sergio's name on the caller ID, he answered, but instead of a normal greeting, he heard Sergio's unusually cold and monotone voice say, "Come to Las Canas. You know what to do." Before the officer could respond or ask for clarification, the line went dead. Puzzled and concerned by Sergio's atypical behavior, he attempted to call back but received no answer. Worried, the off-duty officer contacted the police dispatcher, only to learn that backup units were already en route to Sergio's last known location. The dispatcher explained that they had lost contact with him after his initial radio call and were unable to reach him afterward. Meanwhile, 3 police cars sped through the countryside toward Las Canas, their occupants anxious about their colleague. Upon arriving at the specified location, they found Sergio's motorcycle abandoned by the roadside. There was no sign of Sergio or anyone else. Exiting their vehicles, the officers attempted once more to reach Sergio via radio, but to no avail. Spreading out with flashlights, they searched the vicinity for any clues. One officer noticed scattered metal pieces in the sand near the road. Initially thinking it unrelated, he approached to investigate. Shining his light on the objects, he realized with a start that they were the disassembled parts of Sergio's radio and firearm. This alarming discovery escalated the situation. More officers were called in, and a thorough search began. They soon found footprints matching Sergio's heading away from the road and into the woods. Following the trail, they noticed something bizarre. The footprints were spaced increasingly farther apart. It was as if Sergio had begun to take giant strides, far beyond human capability. The officers exchanged uneasy glances but continued to follow the inexplicable trail. The footprints led them through the trees and into open fields, the gaps between them stretching to 10, 15, then 20 feet. For over a mile, they tracked this mysterious path until it abruptly ended at a cornfield. The final print suggested Sergio had pushed off with his right foot and then simply vanished. Despite a heavy downpour that began around 2 a.m., the search for Sergio continued throughout the night. Officers scoured the area, but aside from the perplexing footprints, no additional traces were found. Equally puzzling was the absence of any signs of the poacher Sergio had initially pursued. On March 3, 2006, around 4:30 p.m., roughly 18 hours after Officer Sergio Pucheta had inexplicably disappeared, a farmer in a remote area about 12 miles from Las Canas noticed a shadowy figure on the side of the road. As he squinted for a better view, he saw a man curled up in the mud, appearing strangely out of place. This was no ordinary sight for this secluded region where people were rarely seen. Intrigued, the farmer called out, but the man didn't respond. As he approached, he realized the man was a police officer in uniform, sitting in silence with his arms wrapped around his knees and his head tucked down. Oddly, though the ground was damp from recent rain, the officer was completely dry. The farmer gently touched the officer's shoulder, asking, "Sir, are you okay?" There was no reaction, no movement, no sound. Concerned, the farmer backed away and called the police. Soon, officers arrived and identified the silent figure as Sergio Pucheta. Despite being uninjured, Sergio seemed deeply disturbed, unable to speak. An ambulance was called, and Sergio's boss arrived, coaxing him to his feet, only for Sergio to collapse into a hug and break down in tears. In the ambulance and later at the hospital, Sergio remained tense and sensitive to the lights, though he eventually allowed doctors to check him. Strangely, there were no visible injuries, no signs of dehydration, and only peculiar burns on the soles of his feet, as if he'd been standing on something scalding. As Sergio regained his voice, he recounted a shocking tale. At around 10 p.m. the night before, when he thought he was chasing poachers, he had instead found himself face to face with two sets of burning red eyes. Terrified, he realized these were not human eyes, nor did they belong to any known animal. The red eyes were part of gray, slender figures with large heads and long, thin fingers that never blinked. Rooted to the spot, Sergio found himself unable to scream or move. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pressure in his torso, his back arching painfully as he was forced to walk backward out of the woods. Powerless, he watched as his hands dialed his friend's number and delivered an eerie, detached message. "Come to Las Canas. You know what to do." His hands then dismantled his fire weapon and radio, dropping the parts to the ground, all while the strange figures with glowing eyes watched. After disarming himself, the intense pressure lifted, and Sergio tried to run. But after just a few steps, he felt an unseen force lift him into the air, tossing him forward repeatedly like a rag doll. The soles of his feet began to burn with each throw, and he realized these entities were toying with him, letting him think he was escaping only to hurl him forward again. The last thing Sergio remembered was running through a cornfield, with a sense that he was now alone. But as he looked ahead, he was faced with a wall of pure darkness. No ground, no sky, no stars, just an endless void in which two red eyes stared back. He then lost consciousness, waking up 18 hours later by the roadside, paralyzed by fear. Following this harrowing experience, Sergio retired from the police force. To this day, residents and officers near Las Canas report sightings of strange lights, adding to the region's already notorious reputation for unexplained phenomena. Sergio Pucheta's chilling encounter in La Pampa remains one of Argentina's most baffling mysteries, blending elements of the paranormal, extraterrestrial theories, and the unexplained. Were these entities a product of the supernatural, extraterrestrial visitors, or something entirely beyond human understanding? The footprints, the burns, and the eerie red eyes leave more questions than answers. What do you think happened that fateful night? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more haunting stories of the unexplained from around the world.